original concept was, a date with death sort of thing, but then there's a lot more cases that I'm interested in as well, so I scratched that initial idea so I could focus on more. Today we are going to be talking about the case of April Tinsley, which was a 30-year-old cold case when it was solved. So April Tinsley was born on the 18th of March in 1980 in Fort Wayne, Indiana. She was described as a very sweet, well-liked girl, your typical little angel. No one ever had anything negative to say about April. Her mum described her as a really fun-loving person and that everyone she knew adored her. At the time when April was killed, she was in first grade. She was only 8 years old, and coincidentally, it was April 1st, 1988. She got out of school early that day, came home and spent some time with her mum. She had some lunch, and then April asked if she could go over to a friend's house to play. Janet, April's mum, said, "Of course you can go, just call me as soon as you get there." When April arrived at her friend Nicole's house, she called her mum to let her know that she had arrived, and her mum reminded her to be home around 3:30 to 4. April is usually very punctual, so she would normally be home by the time her mum said to be. Janet wanted her to come home because it was cloudy and it was going to rain. By the time it reached 4 p.m. and April was still not home, Janet started to worry, but she waited a little longer before calling Nicole's mum, who told her that April and Nicole had been playing in a playground and they left that playground a little after 3 p.m. As April was about to go home from the playground, she remembered that she had left her umbrella at Nicole's house. Nicole was going to another friend's house for a play date, so the girls then went their separate ways. April then made the walk back to Nicole's house by herself. However, Nicole's mother said that April never made it back to the house to get her umbrella. Janet now understandably began to panic. April was only 8 years old. Friends and neighbours began a physical search for April. After some time, when they had still not found her, they decided it was time to call the police. It was at about 6 p.m. when Janet had called the Fort Wayne police, and she told the dispatcher who answered the call that her daughter has gone missing after a play date with a friend. When the police officers arrived at Janet's house, she gave them a picture of April and tried her best to recollect everything that April was wearing on that day. A blue turtleneck sweater, a pink and red jacket with light blue pants which had 3 hearts on the left leg, and pink shoes. Detectives went out and searched a 20-block radius from where April was last seen, but they did not find anything and were not able to come up with any explanation. They just didn't have any answers about what had happened to April. This made them assume that she had been abducted. On April 4th, 1988, after being missing for 72 hours, a police task force of 25 Fort Wayne officers joined up with a search party that had been formed by civilians, and it already had 50 people in it. And they began to search the entire area with a fine-tooth comb. At around 3:30 p.m, a man was out jogging. While he was jogging along, he saw a body. It was off the side of the road, approximately 40 feet away, in a ditch. This tragically was found to be the body of April Tinsley. Janet had always wanted to be a mother, and April was the daughter that she had always dreamed of having. With the discovery of a body, the case was obviously now had taken a tragic turn from missing persons to a murder investigation. Based on physical evidence, the police believed that April was suffocated. She was fully clothed aside from a single shoe, which was not found at the time that her body was. The autopsy later confirmed that April had also been sexually assaulted, which, as evil and sick and twisted as that is, it happens in so many abduction cases. Investigators believe that the perpetrator was probably someone that lived in the Fort Wayne area, because this area was kind of a rural wooded spot that wasn't really known unless you lived in the area. Detectives also believe that because her body was just kind of put on the ground, not far from the road, it wasn't like the killer had tried to conceal her body, so it seemed to police that he wanted somebody to find her body. Obviously, the police searched the surrounding area, and that's when they found her other shoe, about 800 feet away on the opposite side of the road. And so they pieced together that the person was driving away and then realised or saw her shoe was still in the car and threw it out of the window when they were leaving the scene. On April 5th, 1988, a motorist came forward and said, "I saw a blue truck just kind of chilling on Decklid County Road." People were definitely on the lookout for a blue truck. A reward was also set up by 2 local radio stations. 2 different funds were established. One was for the Tinsley family and the other one was for April's burial. On the 18th of April, 1988, around 150 mourners gathered at the Faith United Methodist Church for April Tinsley's memorial service. Soon after that, a witness called the police and let them know that she had actually seen a little blonde girl walking on the side of the road, and she had had hearts on her pants, and she was walking near where April was last seen. The witness said when the girl tried to cross the street, someone in a blue pickup truck had pulled up next to her. The witness said that the girl didn't seem to be scared or look like she didn't know the person, so she figured that everything was okay. She basically said that she saw the truck pull up and then the truck and April were gone. She really just thought it was a scheduled pickup, like a father was picking up his daughter, perhaps running a little late, hence the girl walking down the street. The witness honestly did not think too much of it at the time, but she described the driver to the police. She described him as a white male in his 30s with blondish, sandy-coloured, wavy hair, and he weighed approximately 150 pounds, or around 50 kilos, roughly. April 7th in 1988, police released a sketch of the witness description as to what the man looked like. People in Fort Wayne were really freaking out, thinking that there was a potential killer on the loose. When the sketch was released, a lot of tips and information came into the police from the local community members who wanted to help, and many of these leads mentioned a man named Moose. Moose was in a local gang, and he looked very similar to the sketch of the man that had been put out. The witness was able to pick out his photo from a photo array, or also known as a photo display, but that was as far as the evidence went. While Moose didn't own a blue pickup truck of his own, he did have access to one if he needed it. People were coming forward saying that Moose was going up to children at the park and saying inappropriate things to them, scaring them. And police were also told that the gang that Moose belonged to was some kind of satanic cult. By now, investigators were starting to become concerned that maybe April was in some type of satanic ritual or sacrifice. Obviously, the thought of this terrified April's parents, but there wasn't actually any evidence to support this theory. It was just hearsay. For weeks, Moose was the prime suspect in the April Tinsley case, but detectives were never able to find any physical evidence that linked Moose to the crime scene. And he also passed several polygraph tests. Basically, it was at that point that they had decided that Moose just couldn't be considered a suspect anymore. I am going to wrap up part 1 there, as otherwise part 2 will be short, or I have to rush the rest of it, which I do not want to do. Thank you so much 21st of May 1990, 2 years after April was killed, police received a call from a man saying someone had written a message on his barn. The message said, "I killed 8-year-old April Marie Tinsley. Did you find her other shoe? Ha ha, I will kill again." It was spelled A-G-I-N. Badly spelled on this message. Anyway, it was left a mere 10 miles from where April's body had been discovered. The police believed that the message was credible because of the mention of the shoe that they believe was thrown out of the car. It was separate from the crime scene, and the information about the shoe was not highly publicised, so it was likely that the person who left this message was in fact April's killer. Police looked around the area of the barn to see if they could find any kind of clue. They did find some crayons, but the crayons didn't have any fingerprints on them, so were essentially useless in the case. Then the police looked more closely at the note, which had a lot of spelling mistakes and grammar issues. Police figured that this person was trying to seem as if they were dumber than they actually are. When this message surfaced, it sent fear through the community. People started calling in tips again, saying, "I know someone who writes like that. I know someone who says, ha ha." Remember, this happened back in 1988, which was well before the texting era, so it was weird for someone to write like that. The police weren't able to come up with anything solid though, and the case again went cold for another 15 years. On March 25th, 2004, a young girl who was around the same age April was when she was taken, found a note that was in a Ziploc bag and was written on yellow paper. The note was closed or zipped into the Ziploc bag. The note said, "Hi honey, I've been watching you. I am the same person that kidnapped, raped and killed April Tinsley. Here is a present for you. You are my next victim." This note had similar grammar and punctuation mistakes that the note on the barn had had. This highly disturbing present that the person left for her in the bag was a used condom. However, this wasn't the only note that was found. There were 2 other notes that were found with the same message and the same disturbing present. Another note said, "Hi honey, I've been watching you. I am the same person that kidnapped and raped and killed April Tinsley. You are my next spelt victim, V-I-T-E-A-M. If you don't report this to police, I don't see this in the paper, I will blow up your house." What the fuck? These are young girls and he's saying that sort of stuff. Oh my gosh, that was to my child. I would want to kill them. I know I shouldn't say that, but anyway. All the people who received these notes were understandably petrified, as they all had young daughters between the ages of 5 to 9 years old. Police believed that this killer was stalking these children and their families, so they kept an extra watch on the whole area. More neighbourhood patrols, being extra vigilant and staying on high alert. Soon after this, a 4th letter showed up. This time, he included nude pictures of himself. It appears as if this person wanted to get caught, from the way they left her body, leaving notes, condoms with DNA. So I hear the question, why didn't the police, or why couldn't the police find him? Obviously, well, maybe not obviously, sorry, the killer would have had their DNA already in the system's database in order for the police to get a match with them. So if they didn't have a previous criminal record and their DNA wasn't on file, then they can't get a match, basically. However, the DNA was a match to the DNA that was found at the April Tinsley crime scene. This DNA match confirms that the person writing this note is indeed April's killer. Unfortunately, however, no match was found in the national database. So police had no main suspects, and by this time they were desperate to they just wanted to figure it out. So they released some of the letters to the public, hoping that it may jog someone's memory or someone might have some idea. Obviously, this was a great concern to the community, as now there are several children that are being stalked. This person is making threats, and they've already carried out at least one murder. A lot of tips flooded in, but one tip was extremely important. Someone called and accused his own father of being April Tinsley's killer. This man lived close to where April lived and to where April was taken from. He also had a history of child molestation, and he used a Polaroid camera and would use it to take pictures of random disturbing things. He also believed it was his father because he said his father would write "Hi honey" and "Ha ha," which may seem trivial, but his father also had a blue pickup truck, and a couple of days after April's murder, he painted the truck a different colour. Police found this information very interesting, so they brought him in for questioning. He claimed he had never met April, but his daughter used to play with April, so he knew of her. When he first sat down with police, he brought up the fact that he was working on the day that April was killed. This was a major red flag to police, as who remembers exactly what you're doing on one particular day 15 years ago? So the police followed this up with the employer and found out that he was actually not working on that day. He also wasn't working on April 4th, which was the day that April's body was found. Investigators did a huge search of his home, and they found more evidence. They got a yellow notebook which looked similar to one used for notes, and they also found a Polaroid camera. At this point, police firmly considered the man to be the prime suspect. I'm unsure if this man's name was ever released, as I couldn't find anything where his name was given. But the police obtained a sample of his DNA to test against the DNA that was found at April's crime scene and found on the notes, or the condoms that were put in with the notes. Unfortunately though, his DNA was not a match, and this put police right back to square one. On the 24th of June 2005, April's family held basically a little press conference trying to update people on the case and just remind people that it was still unsolved. By this time, obviously there's been a lot of advances in technology. One of those new technologies is called phenotyping. A company called Parabon Nanolabs, they use a DNA sample from a crime scene, and they use it to create a digital sketch of what that person would look like based on their DNA. After they ran the report, the results showed that this person was British or German, has brown hair, green or hazel eyes, and very fair skin. Investigators believe that the man was around 30 at the time of the attack. Interestingly, the DNA description looked remarkably similar to the witness sketch, but given a substantial amount of time had passed, they decided to run the sketch again for him aged at around 50, which is about how old he would have been by this time. Unfortunately, nothing came from this. There just wasn't anything connecting anyone to this crime. But due to the advances in DNA technology and new developments in genealogy, I believe it is, they were able to track down April's killer, finally. On the 15th of July 2018, John Dean Miller, who was 59 at the time, was charged with April's murder. He was tracked down using a relative's DNA sample who had used one of the many genealogy databases which have thousands of DNA records stored in them. This was also the way that the Golden State Killer had been found. They had always had his DNA, as they have with April's killer, but it wasn't until they were able to put it into a public database and track it back to one of his relatives. They got some trash from his trash can and they were able to connect the DNA back to him. That was Joseph James D'Angelo, who was named as the Golden State Killer, if you were unaware of that. So, a few weeks after finding the match with the Golden State Killer, they went to John Dean Miller's house to have some of his rubbish taken. And they found a distant cousin and they built the family tree backwards. Then they looked for descendants and narrowed the search down to 2 brothers. Once the match was confirmed and they were positive that this was the killer, the police approached him at his house in Garble, northeast of Fort Wayne. They knocked on his door, and when he answered, they asked him, "Do you know what this is about?" And he replied, "April Tinsley." On Friday, December 21st, 2018, John Dean Miller was sentenced to 80 years after Judge Serbeck accepted Miller's plea deal, calling for him to serve 50 years for the murder and 30 years for child molestation. Miller was wheeled into the courtroom and only spoke once when he said his name in a strong but shaky voice. After the hearing began, several members of April's family read statements to Miller and the court. The first came from April's cousin, Christina Snyder, who was emotional as she spoke, telling Miller she uses the word human loosely when describing him. She also called him an animal and looked at him and said he was a cold-hearted monster. Her statement ended with her looking directly at Miller and telling him to burn in hell, you monster. April's mother, Janet, also spoke in court, saying, although it's been 30 years, she still remembers the day like it was yesterday, telling Miller he ripped her family apart. She also looked at Miller and said, "You took her life, we want yours." And saying that 80 years he's getting is far less than what he made the family deal with. She also told Miller that he threw April's body out like it was trash and that she could never forgive him and never will forgive him for what he took from her until the day she dies. An affidavit signed by John Miller he did plead guilty basically to murdering April. So that's where he got the 80 years. And yeah, that is the case of April Marie Tinsley that got solved 30 years later. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll give another one down.